When people want to determine your identity, they normally ask questions like, which passport do you hold? Where are your parents from? What language does your father speak? Yet this is somehow called your mother tongue. What language do you speak? Where did you grow up? And the hardest of all, where is home? And obviously there are people for whom this question is easy. People who've lived in one place their whole lives, maybe even one house. People who've always lived within their own culture, are fluent in their languages and have always been surrounded by their own people. And then there are people like us.
Hi everyone, my name is Iwani. I am an actor and digital designer from Zimbabwe and I'm based in Singapore. You may or may not have heard it before, but Afropolitanism at its base is this idea of being African and cosmopolitan. The term was originally coined by a woman named Taya Selassie in an essay that she wrote called Bye Bye Baba, and I'll put the links down below.
We are Afropolitans, the newest generation of African immigrants, coming soon or collected already at a law firm, chem lab, or jazz lounge near you. You'll know us by our funny blend of London fashion, New York jargon, African ethics, and academic successes. Some of us are ethnic mixes, Ghanaian and Canadian, Nigerian and Swiss. Others merely cultural mutts, American accent, European effect, African ethos. In addition to English and a romantic or two, we understand some indigenous tongue and speak a few urban vernaculars. There is at least one place on the African continent to which we tie our sense of self, be it a nation state, a city, or an auntie's kitchen. We are Afropolitans. Not citizens, but Africans of the world.
So I took a class called Afropolitan Literature and Film, and that was one of the first pieces that we read. And every time I read it, even now, I just get goosebumps. I don't know if you can see, but I genuinely have goosebumps up my arm because it really does describe me. I've always had this proximity and distance towards my own cultures. Even though my parents are Zimbabwean, I grew up in numerous countries, including Kenya, South Africa, Swaziland, and then my parents moved to Rwanda and then Uganda once I came to Singapore for university. For most of my childhood, I identified more as South African. I went to school there at a place called St. Stithians. It was a school in which I was one of 4 black girls in my entire grade of maybe 90. I don't know the exact amount, but it was a lot, okay? A lot of white girls. I wanted to be like them. I was very firmly middle class, but I was surrounded by girls who were in the upper ends, and so, you know, sometimes they would tease me and I would be like the poor one. And then I moved to Swaziland, and now we're in the exact same socioeconomic bracket, but in a city in Mbabane. It's less economically developed, and suddenly I'm in the same position, but I'm considered like Miss Fancy Rich Bitch. TM, especially because I go in there and I've got all the the white girl things that I'm doing. And so I got branded a coconut or an Oreo, a cheese girl, that was their favorite one. Princess was another. That was pretty rough. But then I went to high school at this place called the United World College, which is one of 14 very famous schools across the world. It's this school that was started in resistance to apartheid because Swaziland was one of the places in which the apartheid state did not exist. It did exist in Zimbabwe and in South Africa, but not in Swaziland. And so the school had a lot of heritage of being a place of racial acceptance. I get there, this kind of confused identity person who's not quite South African, not quite Zimbabwean, not quite black in some people's eyes. It was just kind of this limbo state of feeling like I'm not African enough. So I crowded towards the idea of being a third culture kid. And I think the idea of a third culture kid is something that is very romanticized. For a really long time it was awesome. I didn't feel the need to justify my blackness or my foreignness or my differentness to any of those people, but I still didn't know what I was, you know? My 3rd year of university, I took this course called Afropolitan Literature and Film. It was taught by the first professor from Africa, who went on to become my advisor. Her name is Ninka Boa, and she actually went to the same high school that I did. I normally don't like to point out people's race, but I think it is important to say that she's a white South African woman, and she came all the way to Singapore, and nearly every writer that we read was black, and they were all from the continent of Africa. I read more from African writers about Africa in that space of one semester than I did in my entire time in high school in an African country. And now Afropolitanism is something that is currently in academic study because, when Taya Selassie coined it, she was writing an essay as much for herself as it was for people in the same position as her. And so that means that there are going to be things that people have contention with. I personally had contention with it because it made it seem like you're only Afropolitan if A, you leave the continent, and B, you be familiar with a Western city. I didn't leave the continent until I was 18 and I came to an Eastern city. And so where did I fit into Afropolitanism? Where are the Africans living in Asia in the discussion about Afropolitanism, right? There were a lot of people who pushed back against that. Some of them you may recognize, like Chimamanda Adichie, or other people you may not have read, like Mbembe. They basically said that Afropolitanism is not novel because a lot of nations in Africa have always been nomadic. There has always been a sharing of culture. There's people who are Nigerians living in Johannesburg, Zimbabweans living in Kenya, for example, are like economic immigrants or refugees. Do they count as Afropolitans even though they've lived in various African cities? That kind of thought and discussion is very interesting to me, and if you find it interesting as well, then let me know in the comments down below and I will make a video about it. And it inspired two projects about Afropolitanism and Afrofuturism. The one was called Diaspora, about Africans who are living in Singapore. The second one is called Kuumba, that I did for my final year capstone for university. I'll put the link down below, and if you'd like to buy a poster, I would love it if you would support me. And then there are two other parts of that, including an Indebele typography and my proposed national dress for Zimbabwe, which I've put on the shelf for now because I really need to settle after graduating from university. Like, let me breathe, Iwani. And so to everybody who has struggled with their identity, and I know there are so many people out there like me, please share this video with them, because I want you to know that there is no one on the planet who can ever make you feel like you're not enough of something, that you're not black enough, you're not African enough, you're not Asian enough, you're not anything enough, because your identity is something for you to decide, something for you to explore. And don't let yourself be comfortable being stuck with the misnomer third culture kid, because there's so much more to you. We should create a community of Afropolitans. That's amazing. We should create a community of Afropolitans and talk about these things. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends and family who may understand or resonate with this. And don't forget to check out my website, kuumba.co. Check out my prints. They are all printed now, lithographically, ready to be shipped, so you could get your order within up to 2 weeks. Yeah, thanks for watching.